Hello. I have very often been asked about how to discover substantial repertoire that is completely or almost completely unknown. And so we at Aldila Records have been described as specialists in discovering unknown, underestimated, forgotten repertoire. So, of course, this is not such an easy question because you have to study a lot, you have to know a lot, you have to listen critically to a lot of stuff. And I have to confess that in many cases the repertoire just came to me. So it was not that I was looking for something in that particular case and suddenly there was something that happened to me. For example, when I went to a Munich second-hand music store, which doesn't exist anymore for many, many years. Knobloch is their name, and I found several interesting things there. One time I found the 3 symphonies by Martin Scherber, and I had no idea that at a later stage of my life I would do some world premiere and the second premiere of the other symphony and recordings of both symphonies in a way that had not been done before. And then at another occasion I found a score by Heinz Schubert. Heinz Schubert is a special case. He was a phenomenal composer in the Kaminsky tradition. He was born in 1908 and he died in the last days of World War II in 1945 when they had no chance to stop the Russian army in today's Oderbruch, East Germany. So the date of his death is not known, and also not the place where he is buried. And so this Heinz Schubert, there was a score of his Preludium and Toccata for double string orchestra with a machine-written letter by the composer to the conductor Wilhelm Sieben with a lot of advices for the performance in that time, 1936, with the Berlin Philharmonic. Later on, Heinz Schubert would do a recording, a commercial recording for Deutsche Grammophon of this piece with the Berlin Philharmonic. And so this was very helpful and very interesting, and so it led us to do some Heinz Schubert and also to release Heinz Schubert on the CD, a piece for the first time, the string trio. And so these things just happened. But of course, I was always looking around and always doing research and found a lot of music, and I can give you one main advice. Never, ever believe in the categorizations of music history. And at least in the 20th century, don't believe at all in what you find in encyclopedias, in music history books and so on, about who are the important composers, the great composers of the 20th century, and of course thinking about that then, who are not. So I would say, for example, that Pierre Boulez was a very special kind of composer. He became very famous as a core leading modernist, and I would say he was not particularly a great composer. Of course, many people will now protest and will say this is total nonsense. But you can listen to the music yourself. You can decide, you can study it. You can study, for example, Livre pour Quatuor, which has just been recorded again, now with 4th movement, first time, which was later added, by the Quatuor Diotima. And this music is horribly complicated, of course. So it's not at all possible to understand it. I'm sure the composer did not understand it. I can explain you what I mean by that. But anyhow, when you listen to the music, there is no logic in the music, of course, absolutely no logic. It's only horribly complicated. When you try to read the score when they play and you have not studied the score in detail before, you will be thrown out immediately. You have no chance. It is this kind of pointillistic way of writing for the instruments that you never know which instrument is now playing which notes. Because you will find it very easily when you look at the score. And you have all these flageolates and all these things. So it is not, from the optical impression, it is not possible to follow the score. So, of course, the musicians are able. And Boulez, I'm sure, was also able. So the kind of musicality, which was Boulez's musicality, and of many of these serialist composers and modernist composers in general, is they had a very good ear and a very good imagination for detail. And they would recognize, if they are really honest, all the details. But it is not possible to go beyond a particular length of the piece and still have a coherence. It's impossible. So it doesn't work that way. It just works like detail after detail after detail. And when you listen to Boulez as a conductor, he does the same with the Mahler Symphony, the same with the Bruckner Symphony, and the same with everything he does. So he understands it in an atonal way. So having said that, I will not talk about Boulez now very much. There are many such names which are totally overestimated as composers. But there are others. And to find music that is substantial and worth discovering, worth playing, worth recording, whatever, you have to look at some things. One thing is, I would still say, the craftsmanship of the composer. Is he really able to translate what he got as a channel into a written score? And so there are a lot of things people think about technique, and today they define technique in a completely different way. They would say it's mainly orchestration, but also orchestration. If you really have a good technique in orchestration, it is not just doing very special sounds and very special noises and such things. Of course, to go in detail about these things, we do an extra consideration. But the second thing is their originality. And this is, of course, also a very misused term. Originality is not to write something that has never been there before, to create sounds that have never been there before. First of all, there are almost no sounds that have never been there before. And second, this is not interesting. I mean, it's interesting in a way, like in the sciences, if you find some new things, and then of course you discover something that has never been seen before. So you go to other planets, to other solar systems, to places where mankind has never been, and you will maybe find some things you did not know about before. What do they mean for human beings? That's another question. It means at least something for scientists. And so if you write music that means something for scientists, it is not necessarily that the music means something for listeners and for human beings. So to have an idea about originality means mainly the origin is the person who wrote the music. Actually, there are some flies here around, so I cannot stay totally quiet when I film this thing here. Anyhow, originality means that you express your vision in an authentic way, which is only the way you can express it. And this has nothing to do with I think I want to be something. It has to do with I am. So as we experience when we meet people who want to be something, we will soon feel that's a masquerade or even see it very clearly. So we are interested in who they are. And the same about artists, about composers. Who are you? What are you really? And this has nothing to do with style. I even knew a wonderful composer personally, Anders Eliasson, who said that he cannot think about style. He writes what is the music that comes to him. Of course, it's not so easy. It comes to you after you got a lot of influences and you got a lot of things that you found attractive and you had some idols and all these things are there, and then you find more and more to yourself. In more ancient times, it was very typical that Johann Jakob Froberg, a great German harpsichord composer, went to Italy and studied with Frescobaldi and was not interested in presenting another music. He was another person writing the music. Same with Schütz going to Gabrieli. All these things, the sons of Bach and so on. So to find out what is originality, you cannot prove that. You can prove craftsmanship to a very high degree. But originality is something that lies beyond that. But you can get a feeling for it. And the more music you heard consciously, the more clear it can become to you. And then, coming from the position of craftsmanship, there is the question of, is the composer able to produce an organic form? And that is what I mean, what is extremely important. Not schematic form, organic form. That means form grows out of its own laws. And so in 20th century music, we have in every country, we have very interesting composers who are not really well represented and who are absolutely worth discovering. I give only some examples. Thinking about Germany, there is this kind of expressionism which is very, very fruitful. So there are not only names like Germany, Austria, I mean, not only names like Schönberg and Berg and Weber and Hindemith, who are great composers, but with very different problems also. But there are composers like Heinz Thiessen, like Eduard Erdmann, like Max Butting, Emil Bohnke, Philipp Jarnach, Fidelio Finke, the Kaminsky School, Heinrich Kaminsky, Reinhard Schwarz-Schilling, Heinz Schubert. There are a lot of people born in the beginning of the 20th century. There are many, many composers who are almost completely undiscovered. I mean, for example, Max Butting, who was the great symphonist in German Democratic Republic by accident, because he was just on the east side of the wall when it was built in Berlin. Butting was a great symphonist, a great quartet composer, and a great composer of many other things. There's almost nothing of his that you can listen to. And then there is a composer who also lived in Berlin. He was born in Wuppertal, in today's Wuppertal. Paul Höfer, a composer totally undiscovered. And there are these great names who are not there in music live and who are not there on the recordings. I mean, also a lot of composers who are mainly 19th century. I just speak now about Jean-Louis Nicodé. I'm still with German Austrian composers. Paul Scheinpflug. You will probably never or almost never have heard these names. Paul Büttner. Yeah. So there are lots, and they are not less interesting than the more famous ones. And this is the same for other countries. Speaking about the UK, we have John Foltz, we have Christian Darnton. Mostly unrecorded composers, and definitely almost totally unplayed, particularly outside of the UK, of course. There are some composers who were famous in the beginning and then were forgotten, like Peter Racine Fricker. So they will find many of them also in the UK. You will find them in France. That's very interesting. The greatest French composer of the late 20th century, I'm absolutely sure about this, was Jean-Louis Florence. He's never played. There are almost no records. At least there are almost no records available anymore. And this music is a phenomenal fusion of African Oriental influences and the great French tradition of organ and orchestration. It is, I would even say, the quintessence of French music after the beginnings of Debussy and Ravel, and absolutely above Messiaen or Boulez or whatever. There are more French composers who are so, I don't know why they are so unknown, like Maurice Ohana, like Olivier Greff. And there is a French composer of our day who I consider the greatest genius of our time, Benjamin Attahir. He lives in Stuttgart now. I can only recommend everyone to listen to his music, to look for his music, to perform his music, to record his music. There is a phenomenal violin concerto, wonderful cello concerto, and a concerto for serpent and orchestra, for example. There is a wonderful string quartet which has been fantastically played by the Quatuor Arreau, and many more things. This music has some minor Asia influences, but it's not modernist, but it is absolutely modern in its own way. Then we have Italy. In Italy, people think about, there is this generation of Respighi. There are some composers like Respighi, Malipiero, Casella, and Pizzetti. Then later there is Della Piccola and Petrassi. And then comes the modernists like Berio and Nono. You forgot a lot. And one name in particular stands out, who I think was the greatest Italian composer in the 20th century. That is Giorgio Federico Ghidini. He has many, many sides. He has incredible craft. He has totally his own harmonic world beyond the time. That means it sounds a bit like bringing together old Italian music and contemporary music in an organic way and in a very, very authentic and fascinating way. He's not the only one, but I want to particularly let him stand out here. United States of America. There is this phenomenal symphonist, Peter Menin. He's never played. And he also wrote a wonderful string quartet, a violin sonata, and a phenomenal oratoric piece, which is called Cantata di Virtute, the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Unbelievably dramatic and coherent and strong music. And there are these, he was Italo-American. His original family name was Menini. There are other Italo-Americans, only to mention them, who I think are really outstanding. There is Vittorio Giannini, coming from the real bel canto tradition, but an incredibly imposing composer with fantastic pieces, and maybe even a bit more his pupil Nicolas Flagello, but they are both totally perfect. By the way, they would both write at the end of their scores always AMDG, ad majorem Dei gloriam. That means they are sure the music doesn't come just from their autonomous way of handling their craft. They are sure the music goes through them. This is something not only they would have said, this is something Bach would have said, Mozart would have said, Beethoven, Bruckner. So it's not so bad to be in that tradition. And of course, if you are very experimental and you always want to be on the forefront of progress, you cannot think like that. So this is of course something everybody has to decide for himself. But I think we are now adults and not anymore the eternal adolescents who think that progress is the only thing. I think musical substance is finally much more important, and it can go hand in hand with progress, as it did many times. But we know that many composers who made some progressive steps are not the composers who are played anymore so much, and others who were considered like yeah, not so new, became much more important because their voice is much more authentic and personal. So you can write your opinions and let me know which composers you think should be there. I can also speak about all of these composers in particular, and many more, of course, if you wish to know more about it. And of course, you can always contact me, particularly if you are a musician and building a program for a recital and being interested in really rehearsing the music well and understanding the music well and getting an idea about how the dramaturgy of building a program works, because that's something else. You need contrasts, and you need contrasts that work. That means that contrasts that allow that there is still some kind of coherent line in the program. And this is not a question of mottos, of intellectual or poetic mottos or whatever. It is a question of how the music can go from piece to piece in a way that it works finally as if it were one symphony created by you. So I'm looking forward whether there are some questions, and I wish you all the best in our Musicians Weekly number 5. We were now heading to a complicated and of course with a complicated matter that can create a lot of discussions. But I can only tell you, never underestimate the level of uninspiredness. Inspiration is worth investigating. Inspiration with craftsmanship.